It was a cold August day that Friday, the 24th, the overcast skies matching the mood at the Hexham sidings. For the final remnants of the once proud Richmond Vale Railway and its remaining employees, this was the day which would mark the beginning of the end. Built in 1925, locomotive number 30 stood quietly as it was made ready for the coming day's work, a routine unchanged in decades. Requiring exacting skill to prepare, the fire is the heart of a steam locomotive, a source of energy which, in the case of this 10-class engine, can haul a 1,000-ton train at 60 kilometres an hour. Enginemen went through their morning ritual, applying lubricating oil carefully to the bearings, slides and running gear of this machine from another age. Engine number 30 was one of 40 locomotives which had seen service over the 130-year history of the Richmond Vale line. Now, only 4 engines remained in use at the Hexham depot. As preparations near completion, final on-board adjustments are made to an air compressor governor by fitters. As the locomotive was taken to have its water tanks filled, the hearts of those at the Hexham sidings were already full. Today, the line's owner, mining giant Coal and Allied, had begun issuing retrenchment notices to the railwaymen. The decision to close the railway had been announced 2 weeks earlier. A depressed international coal market had triggered a massive rationalisation of the coal industry. And like so many uneconomic operations, the steam railway was to become an inevitable casualty of the cost squeeze on coal. The reality of the closure of the line was settling in with the 18 men of the railway, their specialised jobs now going the way of so many others in the coal chain. For the men whose work with steam was more than just a job, the future was inevitably bleak. This line was the last commercial operation remaining in Australia, an anomaly that had until now escaped the march of time. The line linking Hexham Coal Preparation Plant with the Stockrington No. 2 colliery, an 11-kilometre journey, was all that remained of a once grand private railway system. In many ways, it's a tribute to its original builder that the railway should have survived so long, that steam power had not succumbed long ago to diesel or electric power. But as the 62-year-old engine and its train of even older wooden coal wagons made its way across the Hexham wetlands, it was evident, even to the most ardent supporters of steam power, that such journeys were numbered. In few places in the world did there exist such an example of living history. Could anyone have thought at the start of this railway story that it would still be being written 130 years on? Vale Railway followed a tortuous track from Hexham, 15 kilometres northwest of Newcastle, to Pelham and Richmond Main collieries near Curry. It had been an integral part of the development of mines in the so-called South Maitland coalfields. Now, all that remained of the once complex rail network was the line from Coal and Allied's Hexham coal preparation plant to the company's Stockrington No. 2 underground mine. The railway's quaint name actually has links with the days of sail, even before steam. It's named after an estate established in the nearby Wallace Creek Valley in 1823. That was when Lieutenant John Palmer, purser of the HMS Sirius, selected a parcel of land and named it Richmond Vale, after a ship he had served on in the Royal Navy. At the time, Lieutenant Palmer did not realise vast coal reserves lay beneath his land. The Stockrington section of line follows the original route of a private railway constructed in 1856 by John Eales to transport coal from his mine at Minmai to shipping wharves being established at the riverside settlement of Hexham. At first, horse-drawn coal wagons were used on Eales Railway, which had its timber rails laid to the standard New South Wales railway gauge. Horses were soon replaced by 2 small English steam locomotives and the track relayed with iron rails. Built in 1856 by R&W Hawthorne of Newcastle upon Tyne for military use during the Crimean War, these engines went into service on Eales Railway the following year. Number 1 was to see over 80 years' service, while Number 2 was kept working for over a century. In a rebuilt form, it ended its days as a shunting engine at the Newcastle plant of Stewart's and Lloyd's. By the late 1800s, the once small settlement had grown into a town of 7,000 people, most directly employed in the coal mines. By 1859, the Brown brothers controlled both Eales Mine and the railway. With the formation of the J&A Brown Company, they went on to develop large areas of the Hunter coalfields. On their deaths in the late 1880s, James Brown's son, John, became the driving force behind the company, purchasing 2 collieries which would give life to the Richmond Vale Railway. Stamford Greeter No. 2 near Curry was acquired in 1900 and renamed Pelham. The nearby Richmond Vale colliery was also purchased and renamed Richmond Main. It was to become the showpiece of J&A Brown's coal empire and an example of how, even 60 years ago, technology produced results. As production from his mines increased, John Brown sought a more economical method of transporting coal to the port of Newcastle. To eliminate his company's costly dependence on the East Greeter Coal Company's private railway and the government line, Brown constructed the Richmond Vale Railway. He faced concerted opposition from unions and was the subject of furious debate in Parliament, but in the end the Richmond Vale Railway Act was passed, without John Brown revealing his true intention to link the Pelham colliery with Hexham. But since he controlled the land through which the line was run, he just went ahead and built the extensions, at a cost of some £100,000. The cost, he said, was worthwhile. The private railway would save his companies £10,000 a year in transport costs. As the workload increased, locomotives were updated with units like this Bayer Peacock-built Mersey tank engine, the Major. Placed in service in England in 1885, 4 of these engines were working the Richmond Vale Railway by 1909. Most locomotives used on the railway were of British origin. Some of the most powerful included these Robinson-designed engines. Over 500 of these locomotives were built for service in Britain and Europe during World War I by the railway's operating department. 13 of these ROD engines were purchased by John Brown following the war, and some outlasted him. John Brown died in March 1930. The J&A Brown Company continued to grow through a series of mergers and takeovers, along the way acquiring an even larger private railway system, the South Maitland Railway, resulting in a sharing of rolling stock and maintenance facilities with the Richmond Vale system. In 1967, a new holding company was formed, Coal and Allied, which is now one of Australia's largest coal exporters. From a modest beginning with Eales Mine in Minmai, the Brown companies controlled over 20 major mines. A few of these original colliery buildings still remain, quietly resting in remote bush locations. The crumbling brickwork and rusting iron are reminders of a time when the smoking chimneys of mine boiler houses signalled both good and hard times for the men and families whose livelihoods depended on winning coal from deep underground and on the companies finding customers for that coal. Year by year, these sites are slowly disappearing, either by the work of nature or the inevitable march of urban development. The original earthworks leading into Minmai remain, but little else from that time. Minmai's population is now 300, a far cry from the heady days of those early mines, but the town is aware of its history and is now moving to preserve it. Pelham Colliery closed in 1961, and already there's little to show it existed at all. However, Brown's model colliery, Richmond, Maine, which closed in 1967, is undergoing a rebirth, not as a mine, but as a mining museum and a major tourist attraction. However, the lines of the Richmond Vale system which linked these mines with Hexham have largely been removed. Most of the track has gone, but the earthworks and 3 remarkable tunnels, built in 1905, are still in place today. And still surviving are the 2 trestle bridges of the railway, including this one spanning Wallace Creek near Richmond Main Colliery. In the early days of the railway, demand to keep the coal flowing to the port was so great that even when the bridge's foundations were damaged by a flood in 1913, the wagons kept rolling. The weakened bridge could not support the weight of a loco, so wagons were pushed across the shaky structure to another loco waiting on the other side. Empty wagons came back the same way until repairs to the bridge were completed. And so the Richmond Vale line slowly contracted to this 11-kilometre section, linking the Stockington No. 2 colliery with the preparation plant at Hexham. The rest of the original system is slowly vanishing. A few rusting pieces, all there is to show for John Brown's £100,000 investment. Translated in today's currency, that would represent many millions. But that's been the history of the coal industry. Large amounts of capital and expensive machinery have always been required to be competitive with the rest of the world. The tragedy of the trade is that machines grow obsolete, and with the demise of the machines go the jobs of the specialists who operate them. Number 2 in the foothills of Mount Sugarloaf was linked to the Richmond Vale line when the mine became operational in 1940. In 1987, it was the last surviving mine on the line and the last chance to see examples of the remarkable and risky teamwork involved in coupling and uncoupling old-style wagons with none of the automatic brakes and hooks of modern wagons. Careful timing and the use of hand signals between driver, fireman and shunter are essential during this potentially dangerous procedure. In 1810, a gravity system of loading each wagon was introduced at the original Pelham Colliery in Britain. It was still in use at Stockington in 1987. Tethered by a steel cable, the wagons roll under their own weight under the loader. An operator controlling the advance of the wagons fills each of the timber hoppers with around 10 tonnes of coal. Once coupled, the train, averaging 50 wagons, made for Hexham, about 25 minutes away across the wetlands. Only a single line has been used in recent years, but there is a parallel second line from Stockington to Hexham, completed during the First World War. Once used when heavy coal traffic required an up and down line system, From 1962, the second track often became a storage area for disused coal wagons. The wagon system was earlier regarded as a moving stockpile, where coal could be held while waiting for ships to dock in Newcastle. With colliery closures and the introduction of new shiploading facilities at Newcastle, the wagons progressively became redundant, and at one time over 1,000 surplus wagons were stored on the second line. Like so many railway systems, the Richmond Vale line had a history of family tradition. In many instances, it was a case of following in a father's footsteps. Driver John Mordew worked on the line for 28 years in a job he learned from his father.
My father, he was a Lago driver up at Pelham, carting coal from Pelham Ritchie down to here. He also carted from Stockrington Pit down to Hexham and coal to the washing plant. And Dad's time with the railway, I think, was roughly about 38 years. He worked for J&A Brown at the time for roughly 38 years. Since I was about 4-year-old, I've rode on them from the Pelham down to here, and I've roughly, I'd say, for about 44 years, I've been tied up with the locos.
The destination for the loaded wagons was the coal preparation plant at Hexham, where raw coal is washed to remove impurities such as shale. The wagons are emptied by knocking out a pin to let panels in the floor swing open. In early days, the pin boss was a recognised position on the wharves. With the empty wagons in tow again, shunter Brad Bates makes a run to get back on board for the return trip to the colliery. In its heyday, long before the preparation plant was established, the railway was a continual shuttle service between Mines and Hexham, taking raw coal direct to the shipping wharves on the Hunter River. For the crews, the rattling run across the picturesque Hexham wetlands, rich in bird life, is a benefit of the job, according to fireman Ray Cross.
Oh yeah, it's magic out there. Like, the birds don't even worry about us, you know, they just swim along beside us. And they're not frightened of us. I suppose they've grown up with it. And just on the wildlife out there is worth a trip on its own. You're out in the bush to a certain extent in the middle of a metropolis, you know. It's pretty unique, I think.
Although employed on the Richmond Vale line for only 15 months, Ray has had a long association with railways. He drove steam locos when they were operated by the State Railway. He says that as a boy, he had his sights set on the engine footplate.
Well, it's pretty hard to define. Lots of people have tried, but I think it's just born in you, really. Ever since I can remember, I just want to be an engine driver. While I was at school, I just spent my time at the line side, watching them go past and trying to get a bit of a ride on them. Over the last few weeks, I've just watched small children, the way they look at the loco, you know. And it's got to be saved at all costs, no matter what.
Very much at home in the familiar cab of his favourite engine, number 30, John Mordew is a passionate believer in steam power.
Even up till today, I don't think people have really still realised the full potential of steam. It's just endless power you've got all the time. I used to like working on the ROD locos from Pelham when they come down here, when it closed down. But as far as I'm concerned, number 30, that's my pick of the ones that's here now.
In the world of steam, Richmond Vale locos were held in high esteem by enginemen, and to some, they were more than just machines.
We go back to what has been said before, they're just a living thing, you know. Someone said that they are the only thing built by man that's got a soul, and I'll agree with that, because, you know, you're just working with a living thing. And they'll talk to you as long as you know the language.
But, as in railways across the world, economic reality had finally caught up with the Richmond Vale system. Ironically, built by a visionary who wanted to cut transport costs, it was now closing to reduce those same costs. A steam railway involves many quite separate yet interrelated jobs, and overall there's a strong sense of team spirit linking everyone from the light-up crews who bring the locos to life in the morning through to the fettlers who maintain the track. In his position as traffic officer, Neville Madge, another second-generation Richmond Vale man, was responsible for the daily coordination of men and machines. According to Neville, it was the sense of belonging to a team which kept the railway running as smoothly as the machinery around which it was built.
Everybody's got to work in because you've got to work in with the wagon builders, and they've got to tell you where the wagons are ready and if they want any cripples cut out so that they're safe to travel to the pit with the wagons. And you work in with the fitter, he tells you that you'll be lighting up the different locos, so you've got to organise it that you've got a bloke in the shed to look after that loco in steam. And it's more or less everybody works in together, and the fettlers, they come up of a morning and they tell you where they're going to, and you tell them of any problems on the line or any worries, and they go and fix it up. It's something with the amount of men that you've got to all work in together to keep things rolling.
Two dedicated members of the team were father and son Glenn and Brad Bates, whose daily routines as fireman and shunter included filling the locomotive coal bunker. Glenn had worked on the railway for 18 years, his son joining the line only a year before its demise. Glenn's family links with the line extended to his father-in-law and brother-in-law, and he says he'll miss the way of life.
I've always liked working here. I've always worked with good blokes. I've always had good workmates. We've always got along pretty good. We've all had our arguments the same as every job, you know, but in the long run, the blokes are all working good together. They've always been a pretty good mob of blokes. Whenever a new bloke starts here, he's taught the job the proper way at the start, and we've never seen him have any trouble, you know. We've had some thrills with him, you know, at times when blown tubes on the old girl when we've been under pulling coal in from the pit, and she gives you a bit of a thrill. We've had young blokes jump off the engine, you know, and things like that. But over the years, the longer you're on them, the more you learn about them, and the more you understand them.
Be sorry to see it go, I guess, won't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I don't think I'd know how to do anything else after 18 years.
As a boy, Kerry Bryan had wagged school to ride with his father, who'd been a driver on the line. Now a driver himself, Kerry has allowed his own son to experience life on the footplate.
Pick some more up. A bit hot.
Understandably, Kerry has strong feelings about the end of the line.
And some more.
It's just a place in history, and, you know, once it's gone, you can never put it back on again. And, like, I was at a Steam Fest meeting 2 weeks ago, and along with a lot of teachers that were there, and they were very interested in keeping the place open so that they could get the children, like on excursion days and stuff like that, to get them here and show them a part of history instead of just opening up a book and having a look in a book. That's, you know, that's what it really means, history.
No steam engine could be classified low maintenance. Along with the daily tasks of oiling and refuelling, the loco smoke boxes need cleaning. Fine ash and cinders are deposited in the smoke box, and large build-ups can block the lower boiler tubes, affecting efficiency. The robust engines really are a tribute to the engineering skills of the early part of this century. Built in England by the renowned Bayer and Peacock Company between 1911 and 1925, it's remarkable that they were still working in the late 1980s. The engines owe much of their longevity to the skills of such men as John Sullivan and Tom Price, employed as fitters on the railway. Typical of their specialised maintenance and repair tasks is replacement of the firebox brick arch, a job for which there's no substitute for experience. The arch at the rear of the loco boiler is made of fire bricks and controls the combustion process by evening out temperature of the fire and the movement of heat through the boiler tubes. Depending on the workload, This arch has to be replaced every 3 to 4 months, involving a truly inside job. With a curved timber framework in place, specially cut fire bricks are cemented together with refractory mortar to form the arch. When complete, the structure is self-supporting and the frame can be removed. Once the mortar is set by heat, the locomotive can be returned to service. These are skills that are vanishing with steam locomotives. No detailed manufacturer's blueprints are used. John Sullivan and Tom Price rely on a keen eye and know-how that's been handed on over decades. But specialised as these skills may be, they have little application outside a steam railway.
See, I've been employed 29 years with them, and then to be without a job, it makes it a bit hard.
And what about for you now?
Oh, well, I put myself down for a few jobs around the area, but whether anything comes up, well, I'll take it from there, and I'll probably just go on the dole till the time being, till something comes up.
The rolling stock used with the steam locomotives also required specialised attention. Before they left Hexham each morning, each of the old wooden shelled coal wagons was checked by men like Lance Manning, Howard Trevethan and Sam Hooper, their practised eyes detecting any problems. Once over 10,000 of these wagons were in use. When the Richmond Vale line came to an end, only 700 were still rolling. Even in this job, there was a family link. Lance was actually inspecting wagons which his father had constructed over half a century ago. In a last-ditch stand to save their beloved railway, the Richmond Vale men had drawn up costings which they believed proved its continued viability. However, Coal and Allied had its costings, which showed that to keep Stockington Colliery going, the railway had to close. Although the line had only a week to go, the railwaymen were angered by what they saw as the early introduction of road haulage. In a defiant mood, the crew coupled the wagons and then pushed them underneath the loading head, blocking truck access.
Just the principal stand, you know, the coal companies are just doing exactly what they want to do, and you know, we thought we'd make that stand, you know, just to show everybody that, you know, we cared about the place and we want to preserve our jobs.
Yeah.
For Ray Cross, the blockade was an attempt to save the last surviving commercial steam railway.
That's all I could think of, was to try and save this line. It's the last in Australia, and if nothing else, if I leave here, at least I know that I did my best to save it.
Joined by colleagues, the crew discussed the action they'd taken, knowing that there were risks involved. It was a day when father joined son in support of a railway system in which they believed. When the locomotive crew refused to shift the train, they were sacked, and the company withdrew retrenchment and superannuation entitlements. The fire burned low in the loco as day passed into evening. Later that night, the sacked men would return number 30 to Hexham, taking only 8 full wagons. All empty wagons remained at Stockington. In following days, the tracks at the loader were welded closed to prevent a repetition of the men's action. 30 had hauled its last coal to Hexham. Thrusting in all directions for support, the representatives of the railwaymen met with New South Wales Premier Barry Unsworth, pinning hope on an earlier agreement which approved only 1,000 tonnes of coal leaving Stockington by road for the port.
I'll have a talk to the Transport Minister on Monday and stand over here in Sydney.
But the Premier pointed out this did not refer to trucking coal to Hexham. And he accepted economic conditions had rendered the Richmond Vale Railway inefficient. And to keep the mine going, trucks would have to be used. On the following Monday, the sacked men were reinstated and benefits restored, conditional to the company's instructions being followed during the final week. The next day, number 25 made 2 runs to Stockington, collecting all remaining empty wagons. It was a sad time for the crew, Glenn Bates, Ray Cross and Michael Johnson, as 25 steamed towards Hexham. On the last day, coal wagons would be hauled along the Richmond Vale line. preparation of the locomotives for dry storage commenced, a process involving draining and cleaning of boilers and partial removal of throttle mechanisms to prevent their deterioration. It was an emotional task for these men who had lived so long with these endearing machines.
Oh, I feel sad that it's going. I always thought, well, the long as the pit always went, the railway'd go, but things have changed and economical problems, and it's just a bad luck story, and that's the way you have to take it.
The next day, number 25 was destined to play out one final dramatic role in the story of Richmond Vale. Still in steam after shunting sister locomotives into storage, the loco was taken from the shed at 8:15 a.m. Angered by what they felt was a lack of meaningful discussion with the railway's owners, Coal and Allied, about alternatives to the line's closure, 8 of the men decided to make one last stand to keep steam alive. Number 25 was driven to Stocklington Colliery, where the men blockaded the mine entrance with private cars, preventing coal trucks leaving or entering. Local residents, critical of increased road haulage, joined in. Police were called. Coal and Allied management asked the men to shift their cars and return the locomotive. They refused, and all 8 were sacked immediately, and all termination benefits withdrawn. For long-time employees, those benefits were substantial. But the men said money was not important, it was a principle.
I think you've got to have principle. If you haven't got that, you're not worth 2 bob in my book.
Yeah, but you've lost an awful lot.
I have lost an awful lot. I believe the stand that we're taking is the right stand. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing this.
Following requests from senior police, the men removed their cars from the mine entrance, but they stayed with number 25 and refused to return the engine. The afternoon drew on, and the 8 men, all members of the Federated Engine Drivers and Firemen's Association, discussed further action, with the line due to close officially the next day. That night, with support from families and local residents, the men camped next to the hijacked locomotive, discussing the situation which had developed. A sit-in protest was planned to draw public attention to the line's closure.
Mate, scare tactics. You said to me you were going to make life very, aren't you?
At daybreak, number 25 was moved to a more strategic position near Lenigan's Drive, where it could be readily seen by passing traffic. Traffic which ironically included trucks hauling coal from Stocklington. As days passed, a trackside camp was established. Signatures were collected from passing motorists to petition the retention of the railway and a reduction in the number of coal trucks using the road. In the weeks that followed, some 7,000 signatures would be collected. During the long days of protest, the men were kept busy attending to the locomotive, which was kept constantly in steam. Separated from their family homes, the bond between the men, always strong on the railway, grew even stronger as they faced a sense of isolation. Keeping number 25 became a symbol. While ever there was a flame burning in its firebox and steam hissing gently from escape valves, the men felt somehow they could keep the railway alive. As the supply of coal in the bunker began to run low, alternative fuels were found. At one stage, volunteers cut timber from the surrounding bush. A regular supply of water for the boiler was organised. At times it seemed the world had forgotten about number 25 and its band of supporters. Meanwhile, the transport of coal from the mine by trucks went on unhindered. In a bid to lift morale at the sit-in, someone presented a flag bearing the Southern Cross. The spirit of Eureka Stockade was suddenly alive again on an ageing loco, on a railway built last century. There were no troopers storming in to pull down the flag, but the 8 protesters did come in for some harsh criticism from mine workers at the Stocklington Colliery. In a reaction to the protest, Newcastle City Council was investigating the placement of a 10-ton load limit on the road from the mine. The mine workers joined Coal and Allied in stating that such a move would render coal transport so uneconomical the mine would have to close with a loss of a further 120 jobs. But even criticism from their peers did not budge the men who stayed put. Family, friends and local residents helping out with food. Number 25 continued to keep its head of steam. Resourcefulness came to the fore during the sit-in. A hand-fashioned chute simplified the task of handling coal delivered to the site. Similar ingenuity kept the loco's tanks filled. Coal and Allied, understandably critical of the commandeering of the locomotive and aware of the publicity generated by the protest, said the company would enter into discussions with the men, but only after the locomotive was returned. At first, the offer was rejected, but finally, on the morning of October 15, the men held a meeting and decided to return number 25 to Hexham. That day at 2:30, 3 weeks after the 8 railwaymen had blockaded the mine road, they were taking the locomotive home for the last time. Still, they were hopeful somehow the railway could live on.
Oh, a little bit sad, I think. Like I said before, we gave it our best shot. Tried everything we could to save it. Anyway, just leave it up to our union leaders now.
A couple of stops were made during the return to Hexham. Having cleared the road bridge, the defiant Eureka flag was hoisted high on the locomotive. For John Mordew, it was a last chance to take photographs out on the line. As the loco rattled across the wetland embankment for the final time, not much was said by its band of supporters. Their feelings had been expressed by their 3 weeks of protest. Mustering a herd of stray cattle as the engine approached Hexham towards the end of a 133-year-old journey. The single loco was given a warm welcome by family and friends as it arrived at Hexham.
Been away that long?
Number 25 was eased into the shed. Soon her fire would be knocked out. The protest was over. But for the protesters, the tradition of mateship would live on.
Well, that's it, folks.
She's been good while she lasted.
Should have built the loco out of it.
Yeah, mate. Yep.
Warm wind. That's it, folks. Oh, you know, shake it. Yeah.
Anyone got to get any gear at the bathroom?
Yep.
At subsequent meetings with Coal and Allied, the men who took part in the protest would have their severance pay and entitlements returned. But the Richmond Vale Railway would remain closed. The final chapter in a remarkable story had been written. Today, the locomotives are secured and the hundreds of coal wagons lie idle. In suggestions supported by Coal and Allied, there's talk of a tourist operation on the line one day. The fight to keep the railway running would be seen by some as futile, but for those that took part, it was something which had to be done. As Ray Cross said, at least we tried. We all did our best to save Australia's last. And history will remember these machines now at rest, of the men who gave them life, men who gave their best. Of whistles in the valley and country splendour crossed, of a time that once was and an age forever lost.